There's a kind of silence that only small towns know. It's not just the lack of traffic or the absence of sirens. It's deeper, heavier, a stillness that settles over everything like dust on the windows of a home no one dares to enter. Grafton, Illinois, population 647, is one of those towns. It sits where the Mississippi meets the Illinois River, a place once proud of its limestone quarries and riverboat culture, now quietly fading. The kind of town where you wave to strangers, where the post office still closes for lunch, and where people keep to their own, but know exactly what their neighbors are up to. From a distance, it's picturesque. 2 churches, a diner with checkerboard floors, and children biking past neatly painted homes. But if you listen closely, closer than most do, you'll hear it. The town has a sound, a hum, low and persistent. Some say it's the river. Some say it's the wind through the hollow limestone bluffs, but others blame something far more unsettling. They say it came from the basement, more specifically, from the basement of 112 Rivers End Road, that house. To most, it looked perfectly ordinary. A weathered white 2-story with blue shutters, an aging maple tree in the front yard, and wind chimes on the porch. It belonged to the Brenner family, Michael, his wife Danielle, and their teenage twins, Jonah and Sadie. Michael was a dentist. Danielle homeschooled the kids and ran a small soap business out of the house. They went to First Baptist on Sundays, polite, punctual, private, the sort of family you'd describe with words like upstanding and well-adjusted. But there were stories, quiet ones, whispers passed across church potlucks and PTA meetings, how the kids never played with others, how Danielle always wore gloves even in July, how no one had ever been invited inside. And then there was the noise, a soft, rhythmic sound that pulsed from the house late at night, always around 3 a.m. Too mechanical to be music, too regular to be plumbing. It didn't come every night, but when it did, you felt it. I spoke with Carrie Mintz, who lived across the street for 32 years. We used to joke it was just their washing machine. But that joke stopped being funny after my dog started howling at the back door at 2:58 every night for a week. He wouldn't stop until the sound ended. I'm not a superstitious woman, but it got to the point where I stopped looking out the window. I didn't want to know. There was another woman who lived down the block. People called her Miss Marla, real name, Marla Croft. 87 years old, widow, wore the same floral dress almost every day, known for her fierce stares and the fact she walked her yard in circles at dusk, muttering things under her breath. Most people dismissed her, said she wasn't all there, but she watched that house, and she knew something. She told the local librarian 3 years before the events that would shake the town, "That house ain't clean, there's a voice under it, it don't belong to them, and it knows I'm listening." Nobody believed her. Nobody listened. Until the echoes grew louder, until the mail stopped being delivered, until someone noticed Jonah Brenner had vanished, and then, months later, so had Danielle. But I'm getting ahead of myself. This story isn't just about a haunted house. It's about secrets layered under layers of ritual, silence, and generational shame. It's about the people who knew and stayed quiet, and one old woman who refused to. Because before the headline, before the raid, before the basement was opened, Grafton still believed in appearances. And the Brenners, they were the perfect family. Every story like this begins with a moment, a fracture, a hairline crack in the facade. For the Brenners, that crack started not with a bang, but with a whisper, just loud enough for someone to finally notice. It was a Tuesday morning in late October, cold, foggy, the kind of day that makes Grafton look like a watercolor painting. A substitute teacher named Valerie Brooks had taken over at the tiny public library annex, offering part-time tutoring in the community room. She remembers the day Jonah Brenner walked in. He was thin, too thin, and pale. Not sick pale, like he hadn't been in the sun for weeks. Didn't say much, just stood there and stared at the books like he was trying to remember what they were for. What struck me wasn't how strange he looked. It was how he flinched when I dropped a pencil, like someone had trained him to fear noise. Jonah stayed for 20 minutes, checked out a book on entomology, beetles of the Midwest. Then he left, quietly. No one saw him again for weeks. His sister Sadie wasn't much different. described by other students as ghostly and always humming, never made eye contact, smelled like vinegar and cedar, wore thick wool sweaters even in the spring. She never attended school officially. Danielle homeschooled both kids, but she showed up to library readings sometimes. Caroline DeWitt, a retired school nurse who volunteered at the Story Hour, told me this. I asked her once where she lived. She pointed to the Brenner house and said, "Downstairs." I said, "Oh, you have a basement bedroom?" She shook her head and said, "No, I live under the floor." It was the way she said it, like she really believed it. By now, minor flags were starting to wave, but they were just that, minor, easy to dismiss. And Grafton was good at looking away until the noises got worse. It started in early winter. The sound at 3 a.m., once faint and irregular, grew louder. People began recording it. One video, posted anonymously on a now-deleted subreddit, captured something truly eerie. A low, rhythmic thumping, followed by what sounded unmistakably like a child's voice chanting in monotone. The words were unintelligible, but the pattern was clear. 3 knocks, a pause, then a whisper, again and again. It became local folklore. Kids dared each other to walk by the house at night. The police were called more than once, but each time Michael Brenner answered the door in his pajamas, polite and unconcerned. "My kids like to build weird contraptions," he said once. "Sometimes they run the dryer at night to warm the basement. Sorry if it's disturbing anyone." The reports stopped going anywhere. Still, some kept paying attention. Miss Marler, for one. Each night she sat by her second-floor window with a notebook, logging the sounds. I saw it myself, her careful looping cursive, each entry marked by date and time. Feb 11, 3:03 a.m., 3 knocks, 1 moan, something metallic. Feb 13, 3:06 a.m., chanting again, 4 voices, 1 higher pitch. Feb 14, nothing, no sound. Dogs all barked. Jonah seen by old Silo, barefoot. She took her notes to the sheriff's office. No one looked at them. She mailed them to the local paper. They weren't published. She even handed a stack to Father Dunley at First Baptist. He said God would handle it, she told me. But even God needs a witness. Something else happened that winter. Danielle Brenner stopped showing up to Sunday service. People noticed. She had been the smiling face of the church's bake sale committee, known for her lavender soaps and lemon cookies. Now, she was gone. Michael offered a story. She's not feeling well, needed some rest. But no one saw her. Not at the grocery store, not at the pharmacy, not even through the windows of her own home. And still, the sounds came. Every few nights, more frequent, more desperate. In March, Miss Marler knocked on the Brenner's door. She didn't tell anyone she was going to, just walked across the street, her cane tapping rhythmically on the pavement, and stood on their porch for 5 minutes, knocking 3 times, slow and deliberate. Michael never answered, but something else did. Miss Marler never described it in full, only this. There was a sound, not from inside the house, from underneath it. Something dragged, like a chain, and then a whisper through the keyhole. It said my name, it knew my name. She went home, burned her dress, never walked her yard again. A week later, Sadie was spotted on the roof of the Brenner house, just standing, barefoot, motionless, staring at the woods. Police were called again. This time, Michael was angry. "We're tired of the harassment," he said, holding Sadie's hand tightly. "My daughter's sleepwalking. She's fine. We're fine. Please respect our privacy." So the town did, until the day Jonah disappeared, and the whole town would be forced to see what they had been trying not to. It was April 19th, a Wednesday, unremarkable in every way except that by nightfall, one fact would ripple through Grafton like a tremor. Jonah Brenner was missing. He had last been seen near the bridge at the edge of town, a rusted structure spanning the old tributary where the Mississippi forks. 2 high school seniors out skipping gym class spotted him around 10:30 a.m. They said he looked disoriented, dressed in layers of clothing 2 sizes too big, no shoes. He was standing near the rail, one of them told deputies, but not like he was gonna jump or anything, just staring down. His lips were moving like he was talking to the water. By the time they looked again, he was gone. At first, no one panicked. Teenagers vanish, they run away, they come back. But Jonah didn't. Not that day, not that week, not ever. Michael Brenner reported him missing 72 hours later. "He's been in and out of depressive spells," he said at the station. "We think he might be hiding. He's done it before." When asked to clarify what he meant by before, Michael hesitated. The report was filed. A bolo was sent out. Flyers were printed. But those of us who'd been watching, those of us who listened, knew something had broken. Miss Marler certainly did. That same night, she left an envelope on the doorstep of Grafton's only journalist, a former crime beat reporter named Diane Voss. Inside was a handwritten letter. It read, "He's not lost. He's kept. I've seen the light go out in that boy's eyes, one blink at a time. It's underneath. In the dark mouth, I hear it take him." It was easy to dismiss as the ramblings of an old woman, but Diane had a hunch and a long memory. Back in '92, she'd covered a case 3 counties over where a teenage girl vanished, only for authorities to later discover she'd been kept in a root cellar for months by her own uncle. The details haunted her, and there were similarities. She drove straight to the Brenner's house. I knocked. No answer. I called out for Danielle, then Michael. I even tried Sadie's name. Nothing. But the wind shifted, and I smelled something. It wasn't rot, not quite. It was iron, rusted metal, wet wood, and this faint, acrid note, like something had burned and gone out halfway through. She left, but she didn't forget. Diane filed a Freedom of Information request the next morning, looking for any unusual permits or complaints associated with the property. The house, it turned out, had been remodeled in 2007. Basement expanded, drainage system rerouted, but no records existed of who completed the work. She asked around. A retired contractor named Pete Howard finally admitted he'd done it, under strict instructions paid in cash. They wanted the walls thick. I mean thick. Poured concrete, soundproofing foam, drainage like it was a bunker. I figured it was paranoia. Maybe he was some doomsday guy. You'd be surprised how many folks want fallout shelters now. He never saw the finished room. Michael insisted on completing the work himself. Meanwhile, Sadie stopped appearing altogether. Neighbors reported seeing her once, in the backyard, curled into a tight ball beside the tree line, dirt under her fingernails, scratches down her arms. Michael picked her up and carried her back inside before anyone could intervene. Carrie Mintz called CPS. She never heard back. The breaking point came 12 days after Jonah vanished. That night, a man named Richard Vance was driving home from the night shift at the Alton processing plant when his car stalled on Rivers End Road, directly in front of the Brenner's house. He stepped out, opened the hood. That's when he heard it. I thought it was a dog, like low whining at first, then words, real words. "Please help me," like a child whispering through a crack in the floor. He looked toward the house. The porch light was off, but a single light glowed from the basement well window, flickering. Then he saw something move, not a person, a shadow behind the glass. It moved fast, like it didn't walk, just slithered out of frame. That's when I left. I didn't fix the car, I just walked a mile to the gas station and called for a tow. Richard told a co-worker the story the next morning. The co-worker told his sister. She happened to be married to a county deputy. By sunset, word had reached Diane Voss. And finally, it was enough. Diane contacted a former colleague in Springfield, an investigative reporter who now freelanced with a podcast and true crime newsletter. She shared the timeline, the CPS calls, the FOIA findings, everything. He told her, "You need to go inside that house before someone else disappears." But no one, not even Diane, could have guessed what was really in that basement and how many secrets it held. April 30th. That was the day everything began to unravel. Diane Voss had been watching the Brenner home from her parked car for 2 nights. She had legal pads filled with notes, timelines, hand-drawn maps of the block, and finally, she had a plan. At 2:47 a.m., she approached the property from the west. No lights, no movement. She crept around the side of the house to the narrow window well that led into the basement, and that's when she heard it. Not a voice. Not a scream, but chanting, faint, repeating, monotone. It wasn't English, Diane told me, but it wasn't gibberish either. It was patterned, ritualized, like a prayer in a language I didn't know but somehow understood. She recorded 10 seconds of audio and sent it. along with a detailed statement and all her research, to a contact she had at the State Attorney General's office. That triggered the call, and within 36 hours, a warrant was signed. May 2nd, 6:04 a.m. 3 unmarked vehicles pulled into Rivers End Road. Deputies knocked. Michael Brenner opened the door, calm, cooperative. Told them Danielle was upstairs asleep. Said Sadie was resting, but when asked to open the basement door, he hesitated. Then he laughed. "There's nothing down there but storage," he said. "But if it makes you feel better..." He unlocked the door, stepped aside and motioned with his hand. "Be my guest." The officers descended. 3 steps in, they paused, because the air changed. It was colder, heavier, and carried a strange scent. Mold, iron, something else. Something sterile and unnatural. They continued. What they found would haunt the county for years. The Brenners' basement was not a storage room. It was a facility, insulated walls, soundproofed, single drain in the center of a sealed concrete floor, fluorescent lights on a timer, bolted shelving filled with labeled jars, herbs, minerals, dried roots, and what forensic reports would later describe as biological matter of unknown origin. On the far wall, a wooden chair bolted to the floor, fitted with leather straps. To the left, a cabinet of tapes, over 200 VHS and cassette recordings, some dating back over 15 years. And then, along the right wall, 3 small doors, barely waist-high, sealed shut with latches from the outside. Inside one, a padded chamber, no more than 4 feet wide. Inside another, bloodstains. Scratched words etched into the walls. They hear better in the dark. And in the third, Sadie, alive, unconscious, barely responsive. She was rushed to St. Joseph's Hospital under sedation, malnourished, dehydrated, multiple bruises, some recent, others older. When asked if there were any other children, Michael said, "No, just Sadie." Jonah ran off, but he was lying, because hidden beneath the basement was a second chamber. Officers discovered it when they noticed a discrepancy in the blueprint, a gap between the furnace and the eastern wall. Tapping revealed hollow space. A false wall concealed a downward shaft, an old storm route cellar, retrofitted into a sealed chamber. Inside were remnants of what could only be described as an observational ritual space, shelves lined with old books, many in Latin, others handwritten in Danielle's meticulous script, candle stubs, burnt wax, a chalk circle still faintly visible on the floor. But the most disturbing discovery came from the journals, Danielle's journals. They began in 2005, the year Sadie and Jonah were born. The early entries read like any new mother's diary: sleepless nights, struggles with breastfeeding, love in spite of exhaustion. But soon, the tone shifted. Danielle began documenting what she called the echoes, noises she heard from beneath the house. 3:12 a.m., the sound again, not wind, not pipes. A voice says, "Listen." I stood over the floor vent and felt cold. Over the years, the entries grew darker, obsessive. She believed the house was built on a place of convergence, that ancient vibrations existed beneath the limestone shelf on which Grafton stood. Michael, a skeptic at first, eventually came to believe, or at least participate. They began experimenting with sensory deprivation, chanting, sleep disruption, journaling what they heard when they tuned in. Then came the discipline. Sadie responds better after 3 nights in darkness. Less resistance, more clarity. She hears it too. Jonah dreams of the figure. We must keep him still. Stillness invites understanding. These weren't parents. They were acolytes. They had turned their own children into conduits, believing that isolation, pain, and ritual would make them vessels for what Danielle called the original sound, the echo. The tapes confirmed this, recordings of hours-long chanting sessions, children reciting syllables, weeping, screaming, silence, repetition, and most damning of all, a video dated March 14th. It shows Jonah lying on the basement floor, eyes open, unmoving. Danielle weeps. Michael whispers something in his ear. The tape ends with static. Jonah's body was never found. When investigators reviewed Miss Marla's notebooks, they discovered something chilling. The timestamps of the noises she recorded, going back 10 years, matched nearly perfectly with documented changes in Sadie and Jonah's physical or psychological state as recorded in Danielle's journals. Miss Marler wasn't delusional. She had been listening to the pattern of abuse the entire time, and no one listened to her. When the truth finally surfaced, Grafton, Illinois, did what most small towns do in the face of horror. It recoiled, then it whispered, then it pretended it had always known. But nothing, no amount of whispered hindsight or sideways glances could undo what the authorities uncovered beneath 112 Rivers End Road. The basement wasn't a secret anymore. By May 4th, the property had been sealed as a crime scene. Forensic teams, trauma specialists, and 2 FBI behavioral analysts were flown in. Media crews arrived by the dozens. Satellite trucks parked near the church lawn. People stared from porches, clutching coffee mugs and rosaries. Michael Brenner was arrested at 6:18 a.m. He didn't resist, didn't speak. Not even when he was read the charges: aggravated child endangerment, unlawful imprisonment, criminal abuse, suspicion of homicide. Danielle Brenner was found later that afternoon. She wasn't hiding. She was gone, buried under 6 inches of lime-soaked soil in the Brenners' own backyard. The remains were decomposed, but dental records confirmed the identity. Autopsy revealed blunt force trauma to the back of the skull. No defensive wounds. She had been dead for at least 7 weeks. The working theory: she had tried to stop the rituals, or she had refused to go further, and Michael silenced her. But investigators also uncovered something else in the root cellar. Buried under a concrete slab, a second set of partial remains, bone fragments, and a femur wrapped in canvas. DNA testing identified the remains as Jonah Brenner. He hadn't vanished. He had been sacrificed. According to Michael's eventual confession, Jonah had lost the voice. The connection had gone dim. He had become spiritually inert. Danielle had begged him to stop. Michael insisted the ritual required a renewal. He was chosen, Michael said, expressionless. He knew it. He accepted it. There was no fear in him, only return. Michael's trial began in early December. He pleaded not guilty by reason of mental defect, claimed he had been guided by the resonance, an ancient frequency tied to the land, accessed through isolation, silence, and structured discipline. The defense brought in an expert on acoustic hallucinations, who argued that both Michael and Danielle had suffered from shared delusional disorder, folie à deux, that their isolation combined with sleep deprivation and obsessive ritual behavior had warped their sense of reality. But the prosecution had the tapes, the journals, the remains, and one living witness, Sadie Brenner. She took the stand on the 4th day of trial, 16 years old, frail, pale, but steady. Her testimony was quiet, deliberate. She described years of forced silence, locked boxes, days without light, voices whispered through vents, scripts repeated over and over. She recalled being cleansed with salt water, burned with cedar ash, and strapped to the chair whenever she broke the rhythm. But it was what she didn't say that resonated most. When asked if she remembered her brother's final night, she paused for a long time. Then, with a blank stare, she whispered, "He didn't scream. I think he wanted it to stop too." The courtroom fell silent. Even the judge looked away. The verdict came swiftly. Michael Brenner was found guilty on all counts. He received 2 consecutive life sentences without parole. But the legal system didn't stop there. 3 local agencies were investigated for negligence. Child Protective Services was sued by the state. Grafton police were publicly reprimanded for repeated failure to follow up on citizen reports, especially Miss Marler's. And then came the part the town tried not to talk about. The fact that no fewer than 8 residents had at one point or another reported something suspicious about the Brenners, odd noises, unsettling behaviors, frightened children, and nothing had been done. It wasn't a failure of detection, it was a failure of action. Miss Marler never attended the trial. She was hospitalized 3 days after the raid, suffering a series of mild strokes. But when I visited her last fall, she was sitting upright in a wheelchair watching the river. Her voice was thinner, her mind slower, But when I asked her what she remembered from those years, she didn't hesitate. It was never ghosts, she said. People wanted to believe it was, but it was just cruelty, dressed up in fancy words. You listen long enough to a child crying in the dark, and you learn the sound of evil. And it ain't always loud. She tapped her temple. It's rhythmic, like a drip, like a chant, like a secret too awful to say out loud. She smiled just slightly. I said it anyway. After the trial, the Brenner house was condemned. Windows boarded, yard fenced, basement filled with cement. They bulldozed it in March of the following year, but Grafton never went quiet, because even after justice was served, something lingered. A hum, faint, low, unshakable. After the trials, after the reports, after the final brick of 112 Riversend Road crumbled to dust, Grafton did what so many towns do in the wake of tragedy. It tried to forget. But some stories won't let themselves be buried, because this wasn't just the tale of one family gone astray. It was a story about silence, about belief twisted into control, about the failure of neighbors, of institutions, of faith, and about one girl who survived. Sadie Brenner was placed under protective custody immediately after the raid. She spent 2 months in a state-run trauma facility outside Springfield, then transferred to the home of a distant relative in Missouri, an aunt who hadn't spoken to Danielle in over a decade. She didn't speak publicly for almost 2 years, but last fall, on the 3rd anniversary of the raid, she agreed to a taped interview with a survivor support group. I was given permission to use parts of it here. Her voice is soft, careful, but unwavering. People always ask what I remember most. The chanting, the dark, the chair. But honestly, it was the quiet. The kind of quiet that feels like pressure, that makes your ears ring. My father used to say that was the sound of the earth talking to us, but I think it was just loneliness. She pauses. He taught me to fear light, taught me pain was clarity, that if I just stayed still long enough, I'd hear what they heard, but I never did. Not really. I think the thing they were listening to, it was just themselves, echoing off each other. Sadie is now finishing high school. She draws. She writes poetry. She's in therapy 3 times a week. Some days are better than others. She keeps a photograph of Jonah in her room. Not the last photo, the one investigators found on the VHS tapes. An earlier one. He's laughing, covered in chalk, 6 years old. He never had a chance to grow out of that basement, she says. But I did. The fallout reached far beyond the Brenners. After multiple hearings, Illinois passed Sadie's Law, a set of reforms that require all child welfare complaints to be automatically reviewed by a secondary office if they involve homeschooling, behavioral isolation, or prior CPS contact. The law faced pushback, but it passed. The Grafton Police Department was reorganized. The county sheriff quietly retired, and the town built a memorial bench overlooking the river near where Jonah was last seen. The plaque reads, "For the unheard, may their silence never go unnoticed again." And Miss Marla, she passed away in June of the following year, peacefully, in her sleep, a stack of spiral notebooks still on her nightstand. She had documented over 2,000 entries in total, times, dates, sounds, the rhythm of a house unraveling. At her funeral, Diane Voss read from one of her final notes. "They say the sound was just in my head. Maybe it was, but that don't mean it wasn't real. Some truths echo long after the voices are gone. My job wasn't to stop it, just to write it down." Her grave is modest, but always covered in flowers. People remember her now. They listen. I've spent the last year compiling this story, piecing together the court documents, the witness testimonies, the fragments of tape that are still too difficult to play in full. And when I stood at the site where 112 Riversend Road used to be, just an empty lot now, wildflowers growing where that old maple tree once stood, I noticed something. The silence. Not the absence of sound, but the presence of silence. A silence earned, because what happened there can't be undone, but it can be remembered, and maybe that's enough, because what hides behind a perfect smile can be the darkest secret of all.